London, 1886. On a cold January night, a respectable doctor locked the door to his laboratory. Dr. Henry Jekyll, surgeon, philanthropist, impeccable Victorian gentleman, had spent months working on something no colleague could ever know about. It was not a cure. It was not a scientific breakthrough. It was a chemical confession. He had created a substance that promised to do what he never had the courage to do himself: separate the darkness living inside him from the man he pretended to be. When he drank the potion for the first time, his body convulsed. His bones cracked. His hands shrank. And when he looked in the mirror, he saw a face he did not recognize. But that, on some deep level, he had always known. Smaller, younger, repulsive, free. Edward Hyde was born, not as an external monster, not as a disease, but as everything Jekyll had spent his entire life hiding, suppressing, locking away behind his spotless reputation. All human beings, as we meet them, are commingled out of good and evil. Robert Louis Stevenson did not write a horror story. He wrote the most accurate portrait of what happens when a human being refuses to look at their own darkness. And what makes this story so disturbing is not Hyde. It is Jekyll. It is the good man, the educated, generous, universally admired man who, by denying every dark impulse he felt, fed a monster inside himself until he could no longer control it. 60 years later, a Swiss psychiatrist would give it an exact name. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the part of you that exists, that is real, that pulses, but that you learned to hide because the world told you it was unacceptable. And Jung made a claim that would forever change how we understand human suffering. The shadow does not disappear when you ignore it. It grows. It strengthens. It controls you in exact proportion to how much you pretend it doesn't exist. Now look at the world around you. How many people do you know who live a perfectly curated life? The perfect resume, the perfect relationship, the perfect version of themselves on social media, and still feel an inexplicable emptiness? Who did everything right and still feel like frauds in their own lives? Who are kind to everyone but carry a quiet rage they can't explain? What Jung understood, and what modern neuroscience now confirms, is that this emptiness is not a lack of purpose. It is a lack of truth. You are not empty because you haven't found who you should be. You are empty because you buried who you actually are. And the story of how Jekyll destroyed himself trying to be only half of who he was is not fiction. It is the most precise diagnosis of what millions of people do every single day without needing any potion. There is a silent epidemic that no doctor diagnoses and no prescription resolves. It doesn't show up on tests. It has no clinical name. But if you pay attention, you'll recognize it in nearly everyone around you, and probably in yourself. It is the epidemic of performance, of being an edited version of yourself, all the time, everywhere, without rest. You wake up and already put on the first mask. At work, you are the productive, cooperative, always available version. With friends, you are the relaxed, confident version that never needs help. In relationships, you are the understanding, patient version that never feels disproportionate anger. On social media, you are the curated version, balanced opinions, life under control, constant growth. And when someone asks how you are, the answer is automatic. I'm fine. But you are not fine. Something inside you knows that the version you present to the world is not complete. That there are thoughts you never say out loud, desires you hide even from yourself, angers you swallow, fears you pretend not to have. entire parts of your personality that have been pushed so deep you can barely access them. Psychologist Brené Brown from the University of Houston spent 2 decades researching vulnerability and shame. What she discovered is devastatingly simple. The people who try hardest to appear perfect are the ones who suffer most. In her studies published in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology, Brown demonstrated that the chronic suppression of unacceptable emotions, anger, envy, fear, desire, does not eliminate those emotions. It transforms them into generalized anxiety, into inexplicable exhaustion, into a persistent feeling that something is fundamentally wrong with you, even when everything on the surface seems fine. Researcher Daniel Wegner at Harvard proved this in the laboratory with an experiment that became a classic in cognitive psychology. He asked a group of people not to think about a white bear. The result? They thought about the white bear twice as often. Wegner called this ironic process theory. When you try to suppress a thought, the brain creates a monitoring system to check whether the thought is still there. And that constant monitoring brings the thought back with greater force. The more you try not to think about something, the more it dominates your mind. The more you try to suppress a thought, the more it dominates your mind. Now apply this not to a thought, but to an entire part of your personality. To that part of you that feels envy when a friend achieves something you wanted. To that part that wants to scream when everyone expects you to smile. To that part that questions whether the path you chose, the career, the relationship, the city, was really your choice, or just what was expected. You haven't thought about these parts in years, but they are there. And the more you ignore them, the more they control your reactions in the moments you least expect. This is why calm people have terrifying outbursts of rage. This is why successful people sabotage their own careers on the eve of a promotion. This is why people in stable relationships feel an inexplicable attraction to everything that could destroy what they've built. What is repressed does not disappear. It waits. And when it finally erupts, the person looks at the wreckage and thinks, "This is not me." But it is. It is exactly you. The part you decided didn't deserve to exist. Jung knew this over a century ago, and Stevenson, in a short novel written in 3 days during a hallucinatory fever, turned that knowledge into the most powerful image literature has ever produced about the price of denying who you really are. Because Jekyll was not destroyed by Hyde. Jekyll was destroyed by Jekyll, by the decision that a human being can exist as only half of himself. Carl Gustav Jung was born in 1875 in Keswell, a small Swiss village on the shores of Lake Constance. The son of a Protestant pastor and a mother who suffered from severe depressive episodes, Jung grew up in a house where the appearance of normality was maintained at all costs. His father preached about God, but privately confessed he no longer believed. His mother was affectionate during the day and locked herself in her room at night, talking to voices no one else could hear. From an early age, Jung learned what it meant to live in 2 layers, the one you show the world and the one that festers in the dark. He became a psychiatrist. He worked with Sigmund Freud. But where Freud saw the unconscious as a reservoir of repressed sexual desires, Jung saw something vaster, older, more dangerous. He saw an entire architecture of the human psyche, with chambers that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. And at the center of that architecture, in a basement few had the courage to descend into, was what he called the shadow. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. For Jung, the shadow is not your evil side. That is the simplification pop culture made of the concept, rendering it harmless, easy to digest, easy to ignore. The shadow is something more disturbing than evil. It is everything you are but decided you shouldn't be. It may contain anger, yes, but it may also contain creativity you abandoned because it wasn't practical. Ambition you suffocated because you were told it was arrogance. Sensitivity you buried because men don't cry, or because crying meant being weak, or simply because no one ever gave you permission to feel without apologizing. The shadow forms early. When a child expresses anger and is punished, they learn that anger is unacceptable. When a teenager shows vulnerability and is ridiculed, they learn that vulnerability is dangerous. When a young adult feels envy and is ashamed, they learn that envy is dirty. And so, piece by piece, the person exiles parts of themselves to a territory Jung called the unconscious. They don't die. They are transferred to a place where they cannot be seen, but from where they continue to operate. This is where Stevenson enters. Because what Jung described in clinical language in 1912, Stevenson had narrated in literary language in 1886, 30 years earlier, and with a precision that still haunts. The story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is not, as many believe, about a good man who transforms into an evil man. It is about a man so terrified by his own complexity that he would rather chemically split himself in two than accept that goodness and darkness inhabit the same body. Jekyll does not create Hyde by accident. He creates Hyde out of desperation. Because the pressure of being irreproachable, the perfect doctor, the perfect citizen, the perfect gentleman, became so suffocating that the only way out he could see was to give his shadow a separate body. A body that could do everything Jekyll wouldn't allow himself to do. And so, feel pleasure without guilt, feel anger without consequences, exist without the mask. Stevenson wrote the entire novella in 3 days during a fever. His wife, Fanny, read the first draft and told him he had wasted the story's potential by treating it as mere adventure. Stevenson burned the manuscript and rewrote everything from scratch, this time as allegory. And the allegory was this: the true horror is not Hyde. Hyde is just laziness, pleasure, impulse, ordinary cruelty, things that exist in every human being. The true horror is Jekyll. It is the man who built an entire life on self-denial, who was so addicted to his own reputation for goodness that he preferred total destruction over admitting he was also capable of ugly things. Jung read Stevenson, and he recognized in him something his patients demonstrated on the couch every day. Projection. When Jekyll looks at Hyde with disgust, he is doing exactly what we do when we judge someone with disproportionate intensity. The colleague at work whose ambition irritates you. Could it be that your own repressed ambition is what really bothers you? The person on social media whose vanity disgusts you. Could it be that you buried your own vanity so deep that its presence in others functions as an unbearable mirror? Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Jung called this shadow projection. We don't hate in others what we don't recognize in ourselves. We hate in others exactly what we do recognize, but refuse to admit. And as long as this projection continues, as long as the shadow remains in exile, it does not stay quiet. It sabotages, it explodes, it controls. Like Hyde, who began as a controlled release and ended up taking over Jekyll's body entirely. Because this is the warning that both Stevenson and Jung left for humanity. You can lock the shadow in the basement, but it has the key. Perhaps you're now thinking, This is a Victorian story, a 19th century metaphor. What did Jekyll and his potion have to do with my real life? With my job? With my relationships? With the exhaustion I feel when I come home and no longer know who I am when nobody is watching? Everything. Because you don't need a potion. You've already made the separation. It happened so slowly, over so many years, that you didn't even notice. It happened every time you swallowed an opinion to avoid conflict. Every time you smiled when you wanted to scream. Every time you said, "I'm fine," when you weren't. Every time you chose the safe path, not because you wanted to, but because you were afraid of what people would say if you chose the other one. You didn't drink Jekyll's potion. You built a persona. The word is Jung's own. And you wore it so many times that you forgot it was a mask. And now, when you take the mask off at the end of the day, you don't recognize the face underneath. Modern psychology has concrete data on the cost of this. Researchers at the University of Virginia published a 2019 study in the Journal of Research in Personality that demonstrated a direct correlation between authenticity, the degree to which a person acts in accordance with who they truly are, and psychological well-being. The more authentic a person feels in their daily life, the lower their levels of anxiety, depression, and emotional exhaustion. And the reverse is equally true. The greater the distance between who you are and who you pretend to be, the greater the suffering. It is not dramatic suffering. It is not an obvious crisis. It is a constant hum, a feeling that something is misaligned, that you are living someone else's life inside your own body. Jung had a name for this distance between the persona and the true self. He called it ego inflation, when a person identifies so completely with their social mask that they lose contact with the totality of who they are. The executive who cannot show vulnerability even to himself. The mother who erased herself so completely in the maternal role that she no longer knows what she wants outside of it. The young person who built such a curated digital presence that they feel panic when someone sees them without filters. They are all Jekyll. They have all locked Hyde in the basement. And they all feel the same inexplicable emptiness. Because you cannot feel whole when half of you is locked away. Neuroscience adds another layer. Studies by Matthew Lieberman at UCLA, using functional magnetic resonance imaging, showed that when a person names an emotion, simply recognizes "I am angry" or "I am afraid," activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear and emotional reactivity center, decreases significantly. The act of recognizing does not amplify the emotion, it disarms it. It is as if the brain says, "Now that you know what this is, you don't need to sound the alarm anymore." This is exactly what Jung proposed with shadow integration. It is not about embracing chaos. It is not about becoming cruel because you have cruelty inside you. It is about recognizing that cruelty exists, and that by recognizing it, you remove the power it has when it operates in the dark. Jekyll didn't need to become Hyde. He needed to look at Hyde and say, "I know you. You are part of me. And because I know you, you no longer need to control me. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." If you have ever felt a rage that seemed disproportionate to what happened, it is not a flaw. It is the shadow overflowing. If you have ever sabotaged something good in your life without understanding why, it is not self-destruction. It is the part of you that was exiled trying to be heard. If you have ever looked in the mirror and felt that the face staring back was not entirely yours, it is not madness. It is the cost of years spent living as only half of yourself. You are not broken. you are incomplete, and the difference is enormous. There is a scene at the end of Stevenson's novella that is rarely discussed. Everyone remembers the transformation. Everyone remembers the horror, but few remember the letter. Before dying, Jekyll writes a confession, and in it he does not say he regrets creating Hyde. He says he regrets spending his entire life pretending Hyde didn't exist before the potion. The creature was already there. It had always been there. The potion created nothing. It merely gave a body to what Jekyll refused to see in the mirror. And this is where Stevenson's story stops being fiction and becomes a mirror. Because the question Jekyll asks himself in that final letter is the same question that echoes through Jung's work, through therapists' offices, through neuroscience research, and, if you're honest with yourself, through your own life at 3 in the morning when you can't sleep. What happens when I stop running from myself? Jung never promised the answer would be comfortable. He said that the encounter with the shadow is the most difficult work a human being can do. Not because the shadow is monstrous, but because discovering that you spent years, perhaps decades, living as an edited version of yourself is one of the most painful realizations there is. It is realizing that the person everyone knows is not entirely you, that the personality you built with so much effort is, in part, a fortress against yourself. But Jung also said something that Stevenson, trapped in Jekyll's tragedy, could not say, that on the other side of this encounter exists something he called individuation, the process of becoming whole, not perfect, not pure, not healed, whole, with the scars, with the contradictions, with the rage and the tenderness, occupying the same body, without one needing to destroy the other. Stevenson ended his story with Jekyll's death, because in Victorian fiction, a man who admits his darkness cannot survive. But Jung knew that real life is more generous than fiction. That integration is possible, that there is a version of you where the respectable doctor and the nocturnal creature don't need separate bodies, where you can feel anger without being defined by it, where you can recognize envy without being consumed by it, where you can admit that you don't know who you are, and that this admission is the first step toward finally finding out. I'd rather be whole than good. The shadow is not your enemy. It never was. It is the part of you that has been waiting in the dark while you pretended the dark didn't exist. And all it ever wanted, all Hyde ever wanted, all every repressed impulse, every swallowed emotion, every silenced truth ever wanted was the same thing, to be seen. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing. Every week, we explore the ideas that shaped who we are and who we might become.